Have you ever met someone brilliant, a doctor, scientist, or professor, who believes something so utterly absurd that it makes you question everything you know about human intelligence? That renowned surgeon who won't vaccinate his children, the quantum physicist who consults psychics, the legal scholar who falls for obvious scams. It's a paradox that challenges our fundamental understanding of rationality. How can someone possess extraordinary intellect in one domain while simultaneously embracing beliefs that contradict basic evidence in another? This contradiction isn't just puzzling, it's deeply unsettling because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about ourselves. Intelligence doesn't immunize us against irrationality. This contradiction reveals something fundamental about human cognition. Our minds don't always work the way we think they do. The very cognitive machinery we rely on to navigate reality often systematically distorts our perception of the world. And perhaps most unsettling, this isn't a glitch but a feature of human cognition. The answer lies in cognitive dissonance theory, a psychological phenomenon first articulated by Leon Festinger in 1957. But its implications reach far beyond academic psychology. They cut to the core of how we form our identities, how we perceive reality, and why we sometimes cling to beliefs even when they're demonstrably false. The French philosopher Blaise Pascal once observed, "The heart has its reasons which reason knows nothing of." What Pascal intuited centuries ago, modern neuroscience has confirmed. Our reasoning faculties are not the objective arbiters of truth we imagine them to be. Rather, they often serve as sophisticated PR agents for our emotional attachments and social identities. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort we experience when we hold contradictory beliefs, or when our actions contradict our beliefs. This discomfort is so unpleasant that we instinctively work to reduce it, not by changing our behavior or updating our beliefs in light of new evidence, but by rationalizing, denying, or reinterpreting reality to maintain our existing worldview. Consider the case of Dr. Marshall, a renowned heart surgeon who spent decades saving lives with evidence-based medicine. Yet when his wife was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he rejected conventional treatments in favor of unproven alternative remedies. His colleagues were baffled. How could someone who rigorously applied scientific standards in his professional life abandon them when it mattered most personally? The answer lies in the distinction between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems, process information, and acquire knowledge. Wisdom, on the other hand, is the ability to recognize our own biases, acknowledge our limitations, and apply knowledge appropriately across different contexts. Dr. Marshall's tragedy demonstrates that even the most intelligent among us can become prisoners of our own cognitive dissonance when emotional stakes are high. When we encounter evidence that contradicts our deeply held beliefs, we experience what psychologists call belief disconfirmation. This triggers a cascade of defensive mechanisms designed not to arrive at truth, but to protect our psychological equilibrium. We selectively attend to confirming evidence while dismissing contradictory information. We reinterpret ambiguous data in ways that support our existing views. We physically avoid situations that might expose us to challenging perspectives. Hannah Arendt captured this phenomenon perfectly when she wrote, "The most radical revolutionary will become a conservative on the day after the revolution. Our beliefs become part of our identity, and challenging them feels like an existential threat rather than an intellectual exercise." Let's examine why this happens through the lens of evolutionary psychology. Our brains evolved not primarily to discover truth, but to promote survival and social cohesion. In our ancestral environment, being rejected from the group was often a death sentence. Maintaining social bonds by conforming to group beliefs was more adaptive than pursuing objective truth at the cost of social ostracism. This explains why intelligent people can believe seemingly stupid things. The stupidity is often not a failure of intellect but a triumph of social adaptation. When a belief becomes entwined with group identity, rejecting it means risking social rejection. The smarter someone is, the better they are at rationalizing beliefs that serve their social and psychological needs, regardless of their factual accuracy. Consider the phenomenon of motivated reasoning, our tendency to reason toward preferred conclusions rather than to follow evidence wherever it leads. When our political, religious, or cultural identities are at stake, we deploy our cognitive resources not to discover truth, but to defend our tribe's worldview. Yale psychologist Dan Kahan conducted a fascinating study where he presented participants with identical scientific data, but framed it as supporting either liberal or conservative policies. He found that mathematical ability actually increased polarization. The more numerate participants were, the more likely they were to interpret the data as supporting their pre-existing political views. Intelligence, in this case, amplified bias rather than reduced it. This revelation should humble us all. As Socrates wisely noted, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. The smartest among us are often the most vulnerable to self-deception precisely because they're better at constructing elaborate justifications for their biases. The philosopher Karl Popper emphasized that the foundation of scientific thinking is not confirming our theories but attempting to falsify them. Yet in our personal lives we rarely apply this principle. Instead we follow what psychologist Raymond Nickerson called confirmation bias, our tendency to search for, interpret, and recall information in ways that confirm our pre-existing beliefs. I once observed a remarkable example of this phenomenon in one of my professors during graduate school. For now, let's say Professor Harrington was brilliant, a leading authority in his field with numerous publications and accolades. He had developed a theoretical framework that had gained substantial traction in academic circles, and he'd built his entire career around it over decades. When new research emerged that fundamentally challenged his theory's core assumptions, his reaction was fascinating to witness. Rather than approaching the contradictory evidence with scientific curiosity, he became noticeably defensive. In seminars, he would meticulously pick apart the methodology of these new studies, question the researchers' credentials, and dismiss findings that didn't align with his established framework. His critique wasn't necessarily wrong. He raised some valid points, but the intensity of his resistance was revealing. What made this story particularly illuminating was its resolution. A senior colleague whom Professor Harrington deeply respected finally confronted him about his resistance during a department colloquium. "James," she said, "I've known you for 30 years, and I've never seen you so reluctant to engage with evidence." That moment of truth from a trusted peer seemed to break through his defenses. Over the following months, he gradually began incorporating elements of the new research into his work, modifying his theory rather than abandoning it entirely. Years later, during his retirement speech, he reflected on this episode, acknowledging that his initial resistance wasn't about scientific integrity but identity protection. "My theory wasn't just something I thought," he admitted, "it was who I was." His intellectual identity had become so intertwined with his theoretical framework that contradictory evidence felt like a personal attack. This story illustrates that intellectual humility, the awareness of our cognitive limitations and biases, is perhaps the most important safeguard against self-deception. As philosopher John Stuart Mill argued, he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. Exposing ourselves to opposing viewpoints doesn't just make us more informed, it makes us more aware of the contingency of our own beliefs. Another powerful form of cognitive dissonance occurs when we invest significant resources in pursuing a goal or belief. The more we sacrifice for something, the more committed we become to justifying that investment. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy, but it's more than just a decision-making error. It's a profound psychological mechanism that shapes our worldview. Consider the case of doomsday cults whose prophecies fail. In his original study on cognitive dissonance, Festinger infiltrated a UFO cult that predicted a specific date for the end of the world. When the apocalypse didn't arrive, rather than abandoning their beliefs, members became even more committed, developing elaborate rationalizations for why the world was spared. The greater their sacrifice, many had quit jobs and sold possessions, the more psychologically necessary it became to maintain their belief system. We see this pattern repeated across domains: the investor who doubles down on a failing stock, the politician who escalates a failing policy, the academic who clings to a disproven theory, the spouse who remains in a dysfunctional relationship. In each case, the psychological cost of admitting error increases with the size of the investment. This helps explain why expertise in one domain doesn't transfer to rational thinking in others. The renowned medical researcher who falls for pseudoscience in another field isn't necessarily being intellectually dishonest, rather they're experiencing what psychologists call domain-specific rationality. Their critical thinking skills are highly developed within their area of expertise, where they've learned to recognize patterns and avoid common errors, but outside that domain they're vulnerable to the same cognitive biases as anyone else. The philosopher Bertrand Russell captured this paradox when he observed, "The fundamental cause of the trouble is that in the modern world the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt." While Russell was making a broader point about dogmatism versus skepticism, his observation highlights an important truth: genuine intellectual sophistication often brings with it an awareness of complexity and uncertainty. Yet this uncertainty can be psychologically uncomfortable. There's a seductive allure to simple, comprehensive explanations that resolve ambiguity and provide clarity. Conspiracy theories, dogmatic ideologies, and pseudo-scientific systems offer the comfort of certainty in an uncertain world. They transform the messy, probabilistic nature of reality into clean narratives with clear villains and heroes, causes, and effects. Let's consider a contemporary example: highly educated people who fall for sophisticated investment scams. The Bernie Madoff scandal revealed that even financial experts can be deceived by fraudulent schemes. Why? Because Madoff exploited not just financial greed, but cognitive dissonance. His victims were presented with returns that seemed too good to be true, but the social proof of other intelligent investors participating in the scheme created a powerful rationalization mechanism. The thought, if all these smart people are investing, it must be legitimate, overrode the warning signs. This points to another crucial aspect of cognitive dissonance: its social dimension. Our beliefs are not formed in isolation, but within communities. We outsource much of our thinking to authorities and peers we trust. This is both necessary, no one has time to independently verify every claim, and dangerous, as it can create echo chambers where false beliefs are reinforced and contradictory evidence is systematically excluded. The Internet age has amplified this tendency by allowing people to curate information environments that selectively reinforce their existing beliefs. The algorithm-driven nature of social media creates what Eli Pariser called filter bubbles, personalized ecosystems of information that shield us from contrary perspectives. In such environments, cognitive dissonance rarely occurs because disconfirming evidence is filtered out before it reaches us. As the philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce noted, the opinion which is fated to be ultimately agreed to by all who investigate is what we mean by the truth. But this presupposes a genuine process of investigation rather than selective exposure to confirming evidence. When we isolate ourselves from opposing viewpoints, we short-circuit the process by which beliefs are tested and refined. So how do we combat cognitive dissonance? The first step is recognizing it within ourselves. The philosopher Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." This requires a willingness to prioritize truth over ego, to value being right in the long run over feeling right in the moment. Practical strategies include actively seeking out perspectives that challenge our own, presenting our ideas to thoughtful critics, and developing the habit of steel-manning opposing arguments, representing them in their strongest possible form before responding. We can also practice the Socratic method of questioning our own assumptions and the basis of our beliefs. Organizations and institutions can combat cognitive dissonance by creating cultures that reward intellectual humility and error correction. Psychologist Philip Tetlock's research on superforecasters, individuals who consistently make accurate predictions about future events, found that they share certain cognitive habits. They treat their beliefs as hypotheses to be tested rather than treasures to be protected. They update incrementally in response to new evidence, and they actively seek out information that might prove them wrong. The scientific method itself can be seen as an institutional response to cognitive dissonance. By requiring researchers to publicly specify hypotheses in advance, submit to peer review, and value replicability, science creates structures that counteract our natural tendency toward confirmation bias. It's not that scientists are individually immune to cognitive dissonance, but that the scientific process, when functioning properly, helps neutralize its effects. Perhaps the most powerful antidote to cognitive dissonance is cultivating genuine intellectual curiosity. When we approach ideas with a spirit of exploration rather than defensiveness, we create space for growth and discovery. The psychologist Carol Dweck's research on mindset shows that people who view intelligence as malleable rather than fixed are more resilient in the face of challenges and more willing to acknowledge their mistakes. As William James eloquently put it, a great many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices. True thinking involves a willingness to have our minds changed, to follow evidence where it leads, even when it challenges our preconceptions. This requires not just intelligence but courage, the courage to admit when we're wrong, and to change course accordingly. In closing, cognitive dissonance theory offers a powerful explanation for why smart people sometimes believe stupid things. It's not that intelligence is irrelevant, but that it's insufficient without awareness of our psychological blind spots and deliberate practices to counteract them. Even the most brilliant minds can fall victim to self-deception. The ultimate irony is that recognizing our susceptibility to cognitive dissonance can itself produce cognitive dissonance. It challenges our self-image as rational beings in control of our beliefs. But accepting this limitation is the first step toward overcoming it. As Voltaire wisely observed, doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. So I ask you, what beliefs do you hold that might be products of cognitive dissonance rather than rational evaluation? What ideas are you protecting, not because they're true, but because they're comfortable or identity-affirming? What would it take for you to change your mind on your most deeply held convictions? If this exploration has shifted your perspective, share it with someone whose thinking you respect but often disagree with. The conversations that follow might not resolve your differences, but they could lead to something more valuable, a deeper understanding of how we all construct our versions of reality, and perhaps a bit more humility in how confidently we assert them. After all, the mark of an educated mind, as Aristotle suggested, is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. And sometimes the thoughts most worth entertaining are those that make us most uncomfortable. Thank you for watching this exploration of cognitive dissonance theory. I hope it's given you some valuable insights into why even the brightest minds can hold irrational beliefs. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into fascinating psychological and philosophical topics. Your comments and personal experiences with cognitive dissonance are welcome below. I'm genuinely curious about how these ideas resonate with your own observations and experiences. Until next time, remember that questioning our own beliefs might be uncomfortable, but it's the surest path to genuine wisdom.